Beneath the indifferent gaze of a blood moon, the pyre's shadows whispered secrets of forgotten oaths. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains, carrying the scent of pine resin and impending frost, as if the very air mourned what was to come. Ilara knelt in the snow-dusted courtyard of Blackthorn Keep, her wrists bound by coarse ropes that bit into her skin like the teeth of a betrayed lover. The cold seeped through her threadbare shift, numbing her fingers and toes, but it could not touch the fire of resentment burning in her chest. She was no witch, not in the way the elders proclaimed, no conjurer of storms or summoner of spirits. Yet here she was, condemned for the sin of survival, for the faint glow that sometimes flickered in her veins under the full moon, a gift she had hidden since childhood. The pack gathered around her like specters in the pre-dawn gloom, their breaths forming white plumes that mingled with the smoke from the unlit pyre. Alphas and betas alike, their eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and fervor. The lunar pendant at Ilara's throat, a simple silver crescent etched with ancient runes inherited from her mother, catching the faint light and drawing murmurs of accusation. It had been her only inheritance, a talisman said to guide lost souls, but now it marked her as cursed. Omega Witch, they had spat during the trial, their voices echoing off the ice-crusted walls of the great hall. She brings the blight upon our hunts, the endless winters that starve our young. Ilara lifted her chin, her dark hair whipping across her face like raven wings in the gale. She would not beg, not for mercy from those who had once called her kin. Her alpha, Thorn, had been the first to turn away, his broad shoulders rigid as he endorsed the verdict. He had claimed her once, in the fever of a mating moon, only to reject her when the pack's fortunes waned. Weakness breeds ruin, he had growled, his golden eyes cold as the steel of his blade. Now, he stood at the forefront, his fur-lined cloak billowing, a symbol of the power she could never touch. The High Elder, a gaunt figure with scars mapping his face like frozen rivers, stepped forward, his staff thudding against the flagstones. By the law of the Diusa and the blood of our ancestors, Ilara of the Silverbrook line is sentenced to the flames at first light. Let her pyre cleanse the shadow she casts upon us. The crowd erupted in a low, rumbling chant, Weavos rising like a dirge, vibrating through the ground and into Ilara's bones. She felt the earth's pulse beneath her knees, a reminder that she was still alive, still fighting the numbness creeping from her limbs. As the guards hauled her toward the stake at the pyre's heart, the lunar pendant swung against her chest, warm against the chill. It had glowed that night in the elder's chamber, when they accused her of cursing the river's flow, turning it to ice too early, dooming the salmon run. But Ilara knew the truth. Her gift was no curse, but a whisper from the moon herself, a pathfinder's sight that revealed hidden truths, dangers unseen. She had warned them of the rival pack's encroachment from the eastern ridges, but they had dismissed her as hysterical, an Omega's folly. Now, that same gift stirred faintly within her, a prickle at the base of her skull, urging her to look beyond the flames. The pyre loomed, a monstrous pile of splintered logs and twisted branches, doused with oil that gleamed black in the torchlight. Torches, those flickering sentinels, cast elongated shadows across the snow, painting the scene in strokes of orange and indigo. Ilara's bare feet sank into the powder as she was forced to climb the steps, the wood rough and unyielding under her soles. The rope around her neck was looped over the iron spike, pulling taut, a noose disguised as restraint. She could smell the pitch, sharp and acrid, mingling with the metallic tang of her own fear sweat. In the distance, a lone wolf howled, its cry slicing through the wind like a blade. Ilara's heart stuttered, sinking with the rhythm of the pack's chants. What was strength? If not enduring this isolation, this rejection that carved deeper than any claw? She had been born to heal, to mend the fractures in the pack's spirit, but they saw only the fracture in her. The pendant pressed against her skin, its crescent shape a cool anchor, evoking memories of her mother's voice. The moon reveals what the sun conceals, child. Trust its light, even in darkness. As the first blush of dawn crept over the horizon, staining the sky with veins of crimson, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Alara followed their gazes. There, at the edge of the courtyard, emerged a figure cloaked in shadow, his presence commanding silence like a storm's hush. He was no ordinary alpha. His armor gleamed with the dull sheen of ancient silver, etched with runes that hummed with forgotten power. The Alpha King, Ragnar of the Eternal Pack, stood unmoving, his eyes, stormy gray and haunted, fixed upon her. Whispers spread like wildfire. He had come unannounced, traveling through the night from his distant throne in the Iceheart Citadel. Why? The pack parted before him, deference etched in their postures. Ragnar's boots crunched the snow as he approached the pyre, his breath steady, betraying no emotion. But Alara saw the flicker in his gaze, the weight of unspoken guilt that mirrored her own despair. He carried a wound, visible in the faint scar tracing his jaw, a mark from battles long past. The wind tugged at his cloak, revealing the hilt of a sword forged in lunar fire, its pommel shaped like a howling wolf. He stopped mere feet from her, close enough that she could scent him, pine and iron with an undercurrent of sorrow, like blood dried on frostbitten earth. "You gather for execution," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the chants, resonant as thunder in a cavern. The elder bowed, stammering obeisance, but Ragnar's attention remained on Alara. His eyes traced the pendant at her throat, recognition dawning like the light breaking the night. And yet, the moon weeps for what haste destroys. The crowd held its breath, the air thick with tension. Alara met his stare, her pulse thundering in her ears. In that moment, amid the pyre's shadow and the dawn's cruel promise, she felt the stir of something ancient, an instinctual pull, born not of desire, but of shared exile from grace. The pendant warmed against her skin, as if the Deusa herself leaned in to listen. But dawn marched on, inexorable, and the torches waited to ignite. What redemption could bloom from ashes yet unmade? The first rays of dawn clawed at the horizon, painting the snow in hues of rose and iron, but the cold lingered like a lover's grudge, wrapping Alara's bones in an unyielding embrace. The pyre's wood creaked beneath her bound feet, the noose of rope pulling tighter with each gust that swept through the courtyard. The pack's chants had fallen silent, replaced by a tense hush that amplified the distant uivo of wolves echoing from the Frostfang ridges. Ragnar's presence dominated the space, his armored form a monolith against the paling sky, and Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild thing caged by fear and an inexplicable curiosity. He did not rush his steps. Each crunch of snow under his boots measured the weight of his intent. The elder shuffled forward, his staff trembling in gnarled hands. "My king," he rasped, voice laced with deference and dread, "this Omega is tainted. Her blood calls shadows to our borders. The Deusa demands purification." Ragnar's gaze never wavered from Alara, those stormy eyes holding depths that stirred something primal within her, a flicker of recognition, as if he saw not the condemned witch, but the fractured soul beneath. "Demands?" Ragnar's tone was velvet over steel, low and resonant, carrying the chill of caverns where secrets festered. He extended a gauntleted hand, the silver runes on his vambrace catching the light like veins of moonlight. "The Deusa whispers to those who listen, elder, not to those who shout verdicts in the dark." The crowd shifted uneasily, murmurs rippling like wind through dry leaves. Thorn, her former alpha, tensed at the forefront, his jaw clenched, golden eyes narrowing with unspoken challenge. But even he bowed his head slightly, the hierarchy of kings unyielding as the mountains themselves. Ragnar ascended the pyre's steps with deliberate grace, the wood groaning under his weight. Close now, Ilara could feel the heat radiating from him, a counterpoint to the frost that numbed her skin. His scent enveloped her, smoke from distant fires, the sharp tang of forged metal, and beneath it, the earthy musk of blood long spilled and unavenged. The scar along his jaw gleamed pale, a silvery thread that spoke of wounds not fully healed, and she wondered, in the haze of her terror, what battles had carved such sorrow into a king. His hand hovered near her throat, not touching, but near enough that the lunar pendant between them seemed to pulse, its crescent warming as if drawing power from his nearness. "You bear the mark of the Pathfinder," he murmured, so softly that only she could hear, his breath ghosting across her chilled flesh. Ilara's pulse surged, instinctive denial warring with the curiosity blooming in her chest. Who was he to name her gift? This stranger king who had appeared like a specter from the mist? Fear coiled in her gut, fear of his power, of the pack's wrath if he claimed her, of the unknown pull that made her veins hum in response. "I am no such thing," she whispered back, her voice raw from the night's ordeal, edged with defiance. "Only a fool marked for death." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, melancholy as the fading stars. "Fools do not survive the pyre's shadow." With a swift motion, he severed the rope at her neck, the blade of his dagger whispering through the fibers like a sigh. The crowd gasped, a collective intake that stirred the air into frenzy, but Ragnar's authority held them fast. He unbound her wrists next, his touch firm yet gentle. Calloused fingers brushing her skin and igniting a spark she dared not name. Instinct screamed at her to recoil, to deny this connection forged in the crucible of her doom. Omegas did not bind to kings, especially not ones haunted by their own curses. Yet curiosity anchored her, a quiet rebellion against the isolation that had defined her exile. As he helped her down from the pyre, his arms steady around her waist, Ilara's bare feet sank into the snow once more, the cold a sharp reminder of her vulnerability. The pendant swung freely now, its runes glowing faintly, casting prismatic reflections on his armor. She glanced up at him, searching those gray eyes for deception, but found only a mirrored pain, the guilt of a ruler who had lost too much to blind ambition. "Why?" she breathed, the wind whipping her hair across her face, carrying the distant howl that seemed to mourn their fragile truce. Ragnar's expression darkened, shadows playing across his features like regrets unspoken. "Because I too have felt the moon's judgment," he replied, his voice a rumble that vibrated through her. "And I will not let haste claim another soul to its flames." He turned to the elder, his posture unyielding. "This execution is stayed. The Omega comes with me to the Iceheart Citadel. Challenge it, and you challenge the Deuce's chosen king." Thorn stepped forward then, his growl low and territorial, but Ragnar's glare silenced him, a clash of wills that crackled like unseen lightning. The pack parted as Ragnar led Ilara away, his cloak enveloping her against the biting wind. She walked in a daze, the snow muffling their steps, her mind a whirlwind of denial and dawning wonder. This Alpha, Ferrido by battles unseen, cursed perhaps by the very throne he wore, had pulled her from the brink. But trust was a luxury she could not afford. The connection stirred instincts she had long suppressed, born of fear that he might shatter her further, and curiosity that whispered he might be the key to her hidden truths. They reached the courtyard's edge, where his steed waited. A massive black warhorse, its breath steaming in the dawn light. Ragnar lifted her onto the saddle with ease, mounting behind her, his body a solid warmth against her back. The pendant nestled between them, a silent witness to the bond forming in the chill. As they rode from Blackthorn Keep, the mountains rising like ancient guardians, Ilara felt the first stirrings of something beyond survival. A tentative empathy fragile as frost on a flame. The wind howled in pursuit, carrying the pack's distant uivos, but in Ragnar's steady hold, she glimpsed a refuge unspoken, where guilt and rejection might forge an unlikely alliance. Yet doubt lingered, sharp as the cold piercing her shift. What wounds did this king bear that made him risk his throne for a condemned Omega? And could she, broken as she was, deny the pull that the moon seemed to decree? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The horse's hooves pounded a relentless rhythm against the frozen earth, each impact jarring through Alara's body like echoes of the pyre she had escaped. Ragnar's arm encircled her waist, a band of unyielding warmth that both shielded and confined, his chest a broad shield against the wind's savage bite. The Frostfang Mountains loomed ever closer, their jagged silhouettes etched against a sky bruised with the remnants of dawn, while the lunar pendant at her throat swayed with the motion, its silver crescent brushing her skin like a persistent whisper. She could feel its subtle heat, a counterpoint to the chill that seeped through her thin shift, reminding her of the gift they had branded as witchcraft, the Pathfinder's sight that now flickered at the edges of her vision. Hazy warnings of shadows in the mist-shrouded passes ahead. Ragnar rode in silence, his breath steady and measured, betraying none of the turmoil Alara sensed coiling within him. His scent enveloped her fully now, a complex tapestry of pine smoke, aged leather, and the faint metallic undercurrent of old blood, stirring instincts she fought to suppress. Fear gnawed at her edges, not just of the pack that might pursue, but of this alpha king whose guilt mirrored her rejection so acutely it felt like a shared wound. Why had he intervened? Kings did not stoop to save condemned Omegas. They enforced the laws that bound lesser packs like Blackthorn. Yet here he was, his body a fortress around her fragility, guiding the warhorse through narrowing trails where snow-laden pines clawed at the sky. As the sun climbed higher, weak and pallid through the overcast, the path dipped into a ravine carved by ancient glaciers, its walls glistening with veins of ice that caught the light in prismatic shards. Ragnar reined in the horse abruptly, his muscles tensing against her back. "We cannot ride blindly," he murmured, his voice a low growl that vibrated through her bones. "The eastern ridges crawl with scouts from the Ironclaw clan. They scent weakness like vultures." Alara's pulse quickened, the pendant warming as her gift stirred, a faint glow in her veins, revealing fleeting images, armored figures lurking in the fog, their eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. She gasped, the vision sharpening the fear that had dulled in the haze of escape. He dismounted with fluid grace, lifting her down as if she weighed no more than a fallen leaf, his hands lingering a fraction too long at her hips. The contact sent a jolt through her, instinctive and unwelcome, a pull that warred with the walls she had built around her heart. "You see them," he said, not a question, but an observation that pierced her denial. His gray eyes, stormy as the gathering clouds, held hers, searching for the truth she had long hidden. Alara pulled away, stepping back into the snow that crunched under her bare feet, the cold a sharp rebuke to her vulnerability. "I see nothing but the folly of trusting a stranger," she retorted, her voice edged with the rawness of betrayal. Thorn's rejection still burned, a scar deeper than any flame. How could she yield to this king's curiosity when it might unravel her further? Ragnar did not press, instead tethering the horse to a gnarled pine and scanning the ravine with the practiced vigilance of one who had danced with death too often. "Then see this. We share an enemy. The Ironclaw have long coveted Blackthorn's borders, and your pack's unrest invites their raid. I came to forge alliance, not to witness execution." He drew his sword, the blade humming faintly as moonlight runes ignited along its edge, even in the day's pallor. Ilara watched, mesmerized despite herself, the way the light played across his scar, turning it into a map of regrets. Guilt shadowed his features, a melancholy weight that spoke of thrones stained by choices unforgiven, perhaps a lost mate, a betrayed oath, wounds that made him more than the crown he wore. The air thickened with tension as distant weavos pierced the wind, closer now, a chorus of pursuit that set Ilara's skin prickling. Her gift surged unbidden, the pendant blazing hot against her chest, illuminating the ravine's hidden crevices where ambushers crouched. "There," she whispered, pointing to a cluster of boulders shrouded in mist, her voice trembling with the effort of revelation. Ragnar nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes, and they moved as one, instinct guiding her steps, his protection a silent vow. He lunged into the fray as the first Ironclaw warrior burst forth, a beta with fur-matted armor and claws extended, his snarl echoing off the ice walls. The clash was visceral, steel meeting flesh in a symphony of grunts and the wet tear of blood spilling onto snow. Ragnar fought like a tempest, his movements precise and lethal, the sword an extension of his will, carving through the attackers with the fury of pent-up sorrow. Ilara pressed against a frozen outcrop, heart pounding, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the crisp bite of pine. One warrior broke through, lunging at her with bared fangs, but she dodged, her Pathfinder's sight granting a split-second grace. Ragnar was there in an instant, his blade dispatching the threat, hot blood spraying across her arm, warm and sticky against the cold. Panting, he turned to her, a gash across his forearm, weeping crimson that soaked his sleeve. "You are no mere Omega," he said, binding the wound with a strip torn from his cloak, his eyes locking onto the glowing pendant. Empathy bloomed in that gaze, softening the king's edges, transforming curiosity into something deeper, a bond forged in the heat of shared peril. Ilara reached out, her fingers brushing his skin, feeling the tremor of his pain, the guilt that pulsed like a second heartbeat. "And you are no savior without shadows," she replied softly, the words escaping before denial could reclaim them. The wind howled around them, carrying the fading cries of the defeated, while the snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the ravine in white silence. They pressed on, seeking refuge in a nearby cave, mouth yawning like the Deuce's maw, its interior lit by faint bioluminescent fungi that cast an ethereal glow. Inside, Ragnar kindled a small fire with flint and tinder from his pack, the flames crackling to life, their orange dance reflecting in his eyes. Ilara huddled close, the warmth thawing the numbness in her limbs, but not the wariness in her soul. The pendant rested heavy between her breasts, its light dimming as the visions receded, leaving her with the raw ache of connection. He offered her a strip of dried venison, his touch gentle as he draped his cloak over her shoulders, the fabric carrying his scent like an embrace she both craved and feared. In the fire's hush, words flowed haltingly, tales of his curse, a lunar blight that haunted his dreams with visions of fallen comrades, guilt from a war where mercy had cost him his queen. Ilara listened, her own story spilling forth, the rejection, the hidden gift that isolated her, the moon's whispers that no one else heard. Fear lingered, a barrier against the empathy swelling between them, but curiosity won small victories, drawing her closer to the flame and the man who tended it. What was strength, if not choosing vulnerability amid the storm? The cave's walls echoed with their breaths, the fire's pop and the distant wind, weaving their fates tighter. Yet as night fell, the Weavos returned, a reminder that refuge was fleeting. Ragnar's hand found hers in the shadows, a tentative link that sent warmth through her veins, the pendant pulsing in rhythm. In that moment, amid the blood-scented air and the fire's glow, Ilara glimpsed the bond's potential. Not love, but a redemption's fragile seed, resisted yet undeniable. But could she trust it, when the past's claws still reached from the darkness? The cave's fire spat embers into the encroaching night, each spark a fleeting star against the encroaching shadows that clung to the stone walls like unspoken regrets. Ilara sat cross-legged on the fur-lined ground, Ragnar's cloak draped over her shoulders, its weight a tentative armor against the chill that seeped from the earth. The lunar pendant rested warm against her chest, its crescent shape a constant pulse, syncing with the rhythm of her breath and the distant weavos that prowled the wind outside. She had shared fragments of her truth, the glow in her veins under the moon's gaze, the visions that unraveled hidden paths like threads from the Deuce's loom. Ragnar had listened without judgment, his gray eyes reflecting the flames, the scar on his jaw catching the light in a way that softened his kingly severity into something achingly human. But now, as the fire dwindled to a bed of glowing coals, sleep evaded her. The air in the cave hung heavy with the scent of smoldering pine and the faint copper of Ragnar's bandaged wound, a reminder of the blood they had spilled together in the ravine. Alara's fingers traced the pendant absent-mindedly, its runes humming faintly beneath her touch. Fear still coiled in her gut, a serpent resisting the empathy that had bloomed between them. Empathy for this alpha, whose guilt mirrored her isolation, whose melancholy duty had forged him into a wanderer beneath his crown. She glanced at him, sprawled against the opposite wall. His broad frame relaxed, yet vigilant, the sword within easy reach. His chest rose and fell steadily, but she sensed the unrest in him, the curse he had confessed. Visions that plagued his nights, echoes of a queen lost to his merciful choices in a war-torn past, binding him to a throne stained with what-ifs. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from the stirrings deep within. The moon, though hidden by the cave's overhang, tugged at her blood, awakening the gift she had long denied. It began as a prickle at her temples, a warmth spreading through her limbs like liquid silver. Ilara gasped, clutching the pendant as visions flooded her mind, unbidden, vivid, crashing like waves against a frozen shore. She saw Ragnar not as he was, but as the Deuce revealed, a king crowned in ice and fire, his path forked by shadows. Ironclaw warriors massing in the eastern vales, their alpha, a hulking brute named Grimfang, plotting to shatter the fragile alliances of the northern packs. But deeper still, a revelation pierced the haze. Ragnar's curse was no mere haunting, but a fracture in his bond to the moon, severed by the guilt of sparing a traitor's life years ago, dooming his queen to exile and death. And she, Ilara, held the key, her pathfinder's sight the thread to mend it, to guide him through the moral labyrinth where power clashed with compassion. Her eyes flew open, glowing faintly with an inner light that illuminated the cave in ethereal blues and silvers. Ragnar bolted upright, his hand instinctively reaching for his blade, but he froze at the sight of her. The pendant blazed now, casting runes across his face like prophetic script, and in that glow he saw it too. The visions bleeding into his own mind, shared through the air thick with their mingled scents. Grimfang's raid, the crumbling borders, the ancient lunar rite that could bind their fates and heal his blight. Deuce's mercy, he breathed, his voice rough with awe and dawning realization, kneeling before her as if she were the altar itself. The fire's embers flared in response, shadows dancing across his features, etching deeper the lines of his sorrow. Ilara recoiled, the intensity of the manifestation draining her, leaving her trembling in the cloak's folds. The visions receded, but their weight lingered, a burden she had never sought. This is why they called me witch, she whispered, her voice fracturing like ice underfoot. Fear surged anew, not of the gift, but of its implications. To be the key to a king's destiny meant entanglement in his wars, his guilts, a redemption that demanded her own rebirth from rejection's ashes. She met his gaze, stormy eyes now alight with purpose, and felt the instinctive pull sharpen into something undeniable, resisted by the rational walls of her heart. You see me as salvation, but I am broken, Ragnar. What if my sight leads us only to more blood? He reached out, his calloused hand cupping her cheek, the touch sending sparks through her veins, warm as the pendant's glow. No longer mere curiosity, but a recognition that bound them, his ethical core, scarred by duty's merciless hand, finding in her the compassion he had lost. Every wound carves a path, Alara. Yours reveals what mine has blinded me to. The cave seemed to hold its breath, the wind outside falling silent, as if the mountains themselves witnessed this unveiling. Blood from his earlier wound had seeped through the bandage, a crimson stain on the fur, symbolic as the moon's phases, death and renewal intertwined. She leaned into his touch despite herself, the empathy transforming, the bond no longer denied, but acknowledged in the fire's dying light. Yet as the glow faded from her eyes, doubt crept back, a chill wind through the refuge. The Ironclaw's threat loomed larger now, their raid a storm-gathering force, and with it, the confrontation with her past, Thorn's pack, the Elder's betrayal, the choices that would test forgiveness against vengeance. Ragnar's hand dropped, but his eyes held hers, promising a destiny woven from their shared fractures. What was strength, if not embracing the revelation that mercy could crown the fallen? The pendant cooled against her skin, a quiet sentinel, as the first distant uivos resumed, heralding the trials to come. Outside, the snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the world in white, while within, the seeds of Renascimento stirred amid the embers. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The snow fell like a shroud woven from the Deuce's own tears, muffling the world beyond the cave's mouth in a hush that amplified the crackle of dying embers. Ilara stirred from a fitful sleep, her body curled beneath Ragnar's cloak, the lunar pendant a steady warmth against her skin, as if it had absorbed the fire's last breaths. The visions from the night before lingered in her mind like ghosts. Grimfang's shadowed horde, the fractured bonds of the northern packs, and Ragnar's curse, a wound that her sight alone could suture. She rose quietly, the cave floor cold and unyielding under her bare feet, and stepped toward the entrance, where the storm's fury painted the night in swirling whites and grays. Ragnar was already awake, his silhouette framed against the blizzard, sword in hand as he scanned the darkened passes. The scar on his jaw caught the faint moonlight filtering through the clouds, a silvery reminder of battles that had hollowed him. He turned at her approach, his gray eyes softening with that melancholy resolve she had come to recognize. A king's duty etched in quiet sorrow. The Ironclaw moved faster than the wind, he said, his voice low, resonant as the rumble of distant thunder. Dawn will bring them to Blackthorn's gates. We ride now, or the alliance crumbles to blood and ice. Alara's heart clenched, the pendant pulsing in warning. Fear twisted in her gut, not just of the coming clash, but of the pull drawing her deeper into his world, a bond that demanded she confront the past she had fled. Thorn's rejection, the Elder's chance, the pyre's shadow, they clawed at her resolve, whispering that freedom lay in solitude, not in the arms of a cursed king. Yet the empathy forged in the cave's glow resisted her denial, a rational thread unraveling her walls. "And if we ride into that storm?" she asked, her breath forming plumes that mingled with his. "My sight shows war, Ragnar. Blood on the snow, packs torn asunder. What choice do I have but to run?" He sheathed his sword with a deliberate motion, the runes fading like forgotten oaths, and stepped closer, the heat of him cutting through the chill. His hand found her arm, fingers tracing the faint glow still lingering in her veins, a touch that ignited the instinctive connection she could no longer fully deny. "The choice is yours. Pathfinder. I will not chain you to my fate, but the Deusa has woven us together, your light to mend my shadows. Turn away, and Grimfang's greed devours all, including the freedom you seek. His words carried the weight of his guilt, the ethical core that had spared a traitor once, costing him his queen, now tempered by the hope she stirred in him. They mounted the warhorse in silence, the beast's muscles rippling beneath them as it plunged into the storm. The wind howled like a chorus of vengeful spirits, whipping snow against their faces, stinging like needles forged from regret. Ilara clung to Ragnar's back, her body pressed close for warmth, the pendant swinging between them, its crescent catching glints of moonlight through the veil. Her gift surged with the motion, visions flashing. Thorn rallying Blackthorn's warriors at the keep's frozen walls, Grimfang's alpha leading a tide of snarling betas across the ridges, their iron collars glinting like chains of ambition. And deeper, a moral crossroads. Her pack's betrayal laid bare, the elders' fear masking their own hidden pacts with the rival clan. The trail wound downward, the mountain's jagged teeth giving way to the open vales where Blackthorn Keep squatted like a wounded beast. As they crested the final rise, the scene unfolded in visceral clarity under the rising moon. Torches blazed along the battlements, their flames dancing wildly in the gale, casting elongated shadows that bled into the snow. Weavos rose in a cacophony, defiant from the walls, triumphant from the encroaching dark. Ragnar urged the horse forward, his growl a command that parted the storm's fury, and Ilara felt the bond tighten, empathy blooming into a fierce protectiveness she could no longer rationalize away. They burst into the fray at the courtyard's edge, where the gates hung splintered, Ironclaw warriors scaling the ice-slick walls with claws embedded in stone. Ragnar leaped from the saddle, sword drawn, his roar a thunderclap that drew eyes from both sides. Ilara dismounted, heart pounding, the pendant blazing as her sight guided her through the chaos, dodging a lunging beta, her hand flaring with lunar light that blinded him momentarily. Blood sprayed across the snow, warm and crimson, staining the white like accusations spilled from hidden hearts. Thorn emerged from the melee, his golden eyes locking onto her with a mix of shock and fury, his fur matted with fresh wounds. "Traitor Omega!" he snarled, blade raised, but Ragnar intercepted, their clash a whirlwind of steel and snarls that shook the ground. Ilara pressed forward, the elder's chants from her trial echoing in her mind, but her gift revealed the truth. The High Elder, whispering to Grimfang's scouts weeks before, trading her life for promises of power. Betrayal, not witchcraft, had doomed her. Grimfang himself loomed then, a colossal figure with eyes like molten iron, his pack encircling the keep in a noose of fangs and fury. He charged Ragnar, their duel a symphony of brute force and regal precision, blood arcing through the air to splatter Ilara's shift. She intervened, her voice cutting through the din like moonlight on water. "The Elder sold you all. Grimfang's gold for my pyre. See the truth." The pendant amplified her words, visions rippling outward, forcing the packs to witness the traitor's pact. Gasps rippled through the fighters, Thorn faltering as the revelation struck. In the pause, Ragnar drove his sword through Grimfang's guard, the Alpha falling with a gurgling howl, his blood pooling dark and steaming. But victory's taste was ash. Thorn turned on the Elder, claws rending flesh in a spray of red that painted the snow. Ilara stood amid the settling storm, breaths ragged, the wind dying to a whisper. Ragnar approached, wounded but unbowed, his hand extended, not in conquest, but in quiet offering. "The past bleeds, Ilara. Forgive them, or let war claim the remnants. Choose love's freedom or vengeance's chain." She met his gaze, the pendant cooling as the moon crested high, its light bathing them in silver. Rejection's scar throbbed, urging flight, but the bond, resisted, rationalized, now accepted, pulled her forward. Empathy won. She clasped his hand, the touch a vow amid the bloodied snow. "Mercy over war," she whispered, the words of philosophy etched in her soul. Yet as Thorn knelt in submission, eyes pleading for absolution she could not yet grant, doubt flickered. What price this choice when freedom's illusion shattered under destiny's weight? The keep's torches guttered low, shadows lengthening like unanswered prayers, as the packs gathered in uneasy truce, the air thick with the scent of spilled blood and fragile hope. But in the distance, a lone Uivo rose, warning of trials yet unhealed. The moon hung full and unyielding above Blackthorn Keep, its silver light spilling over the bloodied courtyard like a balm on fevered wounds, illuminating the lunar pendant at Alara's throat in a soft, ethereal glow. The storm had passed, leaving the snow undisturbed save for the crimson blooms where lives had ended and truths had shattered. Ragnar stood beside her, his breath steady despite the gash across his ribs that wept dark against his armor, his gray eyes reflecting the celestial witness above. The packs, Blackthorn's remnants, and the scattered Ironclaw survivors knelt in a ragged circle, their heads bowed not in defeat, but in the hush of revelation. Thorn lingered at the edge, his golden gaze fractured, the weight of betrayal etching new scars into his once proud frame. The elder's body lay cooling in the snow, a testament to vengeance's swift blade. But Alara's choice hung in the air, fragile as the frost forming on Ragnar's cloak. She felt the pendant's warmth pulse against her skin, a living echo of the Deuce's decree, sinking with the earth's subtle tremor beneath her feet. The wind had stilled, carrying only the faint salty tang of tears mingling with the metallic reek of blood, and in that silence, her heart waged its final war. Rejection's echo clawed at her, Thorn's cold dismissal, the pack's chants branding her witch, the pyre's unlit flames promising oblivion. Freedom whispered of flight into the endless white, where no bonds could chain her fractured spirit. Yet Ragnar's presence anchored her, his ethical melancholy a mirror to her own, his guilt a bridge across the chasm of isolation. Love was no glittering prize, but a forge of redemption, demanding sacrifice, her solitude for his healing, her fear for their union. "What is strength?" she murmured, her voice threading through the night like a silver vein in stone, "if not choosing mercy when vengeance sings sweetest?" Ragnar's hand tightened around hers, calloused fingers interlacing with hers in a grip that transmitted his quiet tremor. The king's unyielding duty now laced with vulnerability, the curse's shadows receding under her light. The pendant flared brighter, its runes casting luminous arcs across their joined forms, and Alara surrendered to the pull she had resisted so long. No longer rationalized as instinct or curiosity, it bloomed into acceptance, a rebirth from the ashes of her exile. She turned to Thorn, stepping forward through the snow that crunched softly under her bare soles, the cold a final test of resolve. His eyes lifted, pleading. The Alpha, who had cast her aside, now humbled by the very weakness he had scorned. "You rejected what you could not understand," she said, her words measured, laced with the tragedy of what might have been. But the Dusa weaves no perfect threads. Rise and rebuild, or fade into the winter you feared. No forgiveness spilled easily. It was a choice carved from her pain, a moral pivot toward compassion over the war that would consume them all. Thorn nodded, a low rumble escaping his throat, not submission, but acknowledgement, the pack stirring with tentative hope as Weavos rose in harmony rather than discord. Ragnar drew her back, his arm encircling her waist with a possessiveness tempered by reverence, his breath warm against her temple. "You have mended more than borders this night," he whispered, the scar on his jaw brushing her hair like a sacred mark. The visions that had plagued him, echoes of his lost queen, the traitor's spared life unraveling his throne, faded in the pendant's glow, her pathfinder's sight weaving them into clarity. Sacrifice had come not in death, but in yielding, his isolation for her light, her doubt for his faith. Union followed, not as conquest, but as equals forged in the crucible of shared wounds. The moon seemed to approve, its light intensifying, bathing the courtyard in a veil that turned blood to rubies and snow to pearl. They walked together toward the keep's shadowed halls, the packs parting like waves before a tide, torches flaring anew to light their path. Inside, by a hearth roaring with fresh-kindled flames, Ragnar knelt before her, not as king, but as the broken alpha he had concealed. "The curse lifts with your choice," he said, his voice resonant with the depth of his relief, eyes stormy no longer but clear as glacial streams. Alara touched his face, tracing the scar that mapped his guilt, feeling the heat of his skin beneath her fingers, the first true warmth since her rejection. The pendant nestled between them, cooling to a steady thrum, symbol of the destiny they had claimed, rejection transmuted to rebirth, power bowed to compassion. Yet even in union, the knight's ethic lingered, a spiritual dilemma etched in the silence. Freedom was no longer solitary flight, but the liberty to heal another's shadows, to let love prove itself through trials unended. As dawn's first blush crept through the frost-laced windows, painting their forms in gold and silver, Alara leaned into Ragnar's embrace, the fire's crackle mingling with their synchronized breaths. The wind outside sighed, carrying away the last echoes of war, but in her soul, the question whispered eternal. Could redemption endure when new storms gathered on the horizon? The Diusa's moon watched, eternal and impartial, as two fractured souls kindled a flame against the endless winter. The pendant gleamed one final time, a beacon of what wounds could become, realms reclaimed, hearts reunited in the dance of mercy and might. If your heart beat alongside ours, comment and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.